Welcome to our Natural Habitat Adventures webinar today. We are here to talk about summer adventures in Churchill. And I'd like to tell you about your presenter today. Moira began working with Natural Habitat Adventures in Churchill, Manitoba in 2014, building on her role in the Canadian outdoor tourism industry as an adventure guide and naturalist. Her job has afforded her many intimate encounters with some of Canada's most iconic wild species, which she loves to share with her guests. And as a guide, Moira has spent countless hours observing and photographing wildlife in a natural setting. Maintaining a low impact on wildlife is paramount to her. She believes in observing, not disturbing. And that's the mantra she lives by. And so we are just delighted to have her here with us. So Moira, over to you.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm looking forward to sharing with you a little bit about a town that I have come to know and love, in Churchill. Some of you may have been up there for polar bear adventures with Natural Habitat so far, and some of you may just be looking at what kind of options there are in the world, but I'm looking forward to sharing some information with you. So here we go. Oops. It's always fun to start off and things are, there we go. All right, so you heard a little bit about me, but my name is Moira Lepaterel, and I'm really love my time. The last 4 years I've spent working as an expedition leader with Natural Habitat Adventures. And I have been lucky enough to spend a lot of time and travel many different places working as an expedition leader with Natural Habitat. I typically spend my October, November in Churchill, which we'll be talking more about, but for the polar bear season, so some of you may have been up there and enjoy that already. Then I tend to go to other colder places, down to Antarctica on our sailing adventure with Natural Habitat, or spending January, February, March up in Churchill cooling things down with our Northern Lights or Aurora Borealis trips throughout January, February, and March. Then typically heading over to China in April and May. I'll be heading over to China for our Wild Side of China trip just in about a week and a half here. And then Churchill in the summertime is where I love to spend my time. So that's a little bit about me. Big addict of wildlife and photography and people and outdoor education. So definitely Churchill is one of those places that all of these come alive and really culminate to make a wonderful trip. So I am coming to you this morning from the west coast of Canada in British Columbia. That's my home province. And we'll be talking a little bit more about one of the other provinces a little bit farther over from me. But here you should see on your screen a map of Canada. So we have 10 provinces and 3 territories. And you should see a little star show up on the province of Manitoba there. That's where our trip for the Churchill Beluga program actually starts, is in the capital city, Winnipeg, the capital city of the province of Manitoba. And when we're looking at Canada, our population is about 35.5 million people. Then we look at the province of Manitoba, the population is about 1.3 million people. The capital city, which is Winnipeg, where we'll start our trip, population is about 660,000 people. And then Churchill on the western shores of the Hudson's Bay, where that little purple star should have just shown up on your screen. Population typically between 750 to 850 people. So amazing difference, and quite a great opportunity to see a subarctic outpost town on the shores of Hudson's Bay. I'm sorry if you hear random crashing, bashing sounds in the background of my cat, who was very quiet this morning, of course, as we were getting ready for this webinar, has now decided to try to break into my office. So apologies if you hear any background sounds. So here's a photo of the Hotel Fort Garry. So this is in Winnipeg, beautiful hotel built in 1913 by the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway. And it's one of Canada's grand railway hotels, and it's been designated a National Historic Site of Canada. And this is actually where our trip will kick off, whether you spend a couple of nights in advance of the trip. Sorry, I just had to let my cat in or she was going to break the door down. Whether you spend a couple of nights in advance of the trip or just starting off on the trip dates, we will actually meet our group and get to know our group of 14 travelers and your expedition leader here, where your expedition leader will lead what we call a welcome dinner. So a great opportunity to share our first meal as a group, get to know each other, find out what everybody's interested in, and then the expedition leader will do a presentation about what to expect for the days to come as well. But beautiful example of a chateau style of architecture if you're into that. That's a great way to start the trip. Other opportunities when you are in Winnipeg, depending on which itinerary you do, whether you're planning on taking the train from Winnipeg up to Churchill, or if you select the fly destination where you're flying to and from Churchill itself, you will have a little more or a little less amount of time to play with your group. This was a photo I took at Fort White, which is one of the opportunities that you can take in a Voyager canoe at the start of your trip, but definitely beautiful landscape to enjoy. Here you should see a map of Manitoba now. A little purple star showed up on Winnipeg, our capital city there, and you can see all those lovely orange lines. They will intersect around Winnipeg. And a little star showed up on Churchill, and you can see none of those orange lines reach Churchill. So all of these orange lines are actually roadways. So there's always a saying of all roads lead to Winnipeg, but no roads lead to Churchill. So obviously, if we are traveling up to Churchill, we will have to get there by something other than road. You can see that last orange line actually ends about 160 miles south of Churchill in a little town in Manitoba called Gillam. So that again, road ends about 160 miles south. So for those of you that have selected to take or are looking at this trip and looking at the itineraries, you can travel by train from Winnipeg up to Thompson. So you can see on the little map there on the left-hand side, Winnipeg with that lovely red dot, and then that turquoise route up past the Pas and towards Thompson. And on this trip, it's actually quite neat. You'll get two provinces for one, because the train does squeak over the border into Saskatchewan, which is the neighboring province to the west, and then back into and across Manitoba. So even though the whole province is about 870 miles from north to south. Of course, the train is not traveling as the crow flies, so you'll travel quite a distance if you do take the train. And the reason why the train route is not a straight line is because the train is actually navigating over muskeg and rivers, and as you get farther north up towards Thompson, then we have permafrost influence of the ground, so different freezing and thawing aspects to the landscape here. And the train line itself from Winnipeg up to Churchill is about 1,000 miles, but the train is not running farther north from Thompson and up to Churchill these days. So what you can do is actually travel from Winnipeg up to Thompson, and that is typically generally around, I'm thinking in kilometers, so if we're converting to miles, typically that's about 600 to 700 miles that you can travel by train. So you'll board the train as long as it's on time, somewhere around noon in Winnipeg, and spend the night on this lovely train as it rocks you to sleep. And then typically about 24 hours later, maybe a little longer, you'll get off the train in Thompson, adventure around there for the day, and spend the night, and then travel on a flight up to Churchill. And there's Thompson. If you're planning on taking the fly departure, or maybe you don't have enough time to spend that extra night in Thompson, the extra night on the train, but you're still looking at this adventure, you can always take the fly departure. So that flight is just around 620 miles, and it takes a couple of hours. So that would be another one of the options for a natural habitat adventure up to Churchill. Now we're going to talk about one of my very, very favorite places to adventure, Churchill itself. Why is Churchill so important, and why do so many people go to Churchill? So this is the Welcome to Churchill sign, a picture I took a few years ago. You'll also see the polar bear crossing sign if you look over on the right hand side to see what that road sign is. There's your polar bear crossing sign. But lovely bluebird day, lovely blue sky day in the summertime. Doesn't always look that way, but certainly there are some lovely days. But why do people go to Churchill? We talk about the 4 B's. of Churchill. And the first B of Churchill has to do with bears, or polar bears more specifically. So typically in the months of October and November are when many, many people are coming up to Churchill, and what they're traveling to Churchill in hopes of seeing are polar bears. And why are polar bears around Churchill? On the Hudson's Bay, we have seasonal sea ice. So it forms in the fall and gets thicker and thicker over winter time, and then starts to break up in spring. And then by the height of summer, the whole of Hudson's Bay is ice-free. So all of the polar bears that were out hunting seals on that sea ice have to come off the ice and onto land in this area. So they will be spread far and wide across the landscape in the summertime. So we certainly don't plan or count on seeing them, because it just depends on what the sea ice has done, when it's broken up. But the bears are on land, and then towards the fall, they're moving back towards the coastline. And where Churchill is on the edge of the Churchill River itself, where lots and lots of fresh water pours into the inland sea, or the salt water of the Hudson's Bay. And that, and combined with many other rivers that are bringing lots of fresh water into the bay in the area, will actually assist with cooling and with the rapid freezing process of the Hudson's Bay. So the polar bears are waiting for the sea ice to start forming, and once there is a skip of ice on the surface of the ocean that's strong enough for them to walk on, then out they go in hopes of catching ringed seals. So that's why October, November is bear season. Second B of Churchill we call borealis, or aurora borealis, or the northern lights. Typically January, February, March is the best time to go up to Churchill in search of the northern lights, because those are the months with the least precipitation. So the clearest skies on average, and the best opportunities of seeing those northern lights. Definitely a little cooler, typically around -40 or below on some of our cooler days in January, February, March. So definitely a cooler time to visit Churchill. And summertime actually has 2 of those 4 Bs, and this is one of the reasons why the summertime is my favorite time to travel up to Churchill. We have bird season and beluga season. So there's over 200 bird species in the area. The birds are having their young and feeding before flying back south as we get along towards the fall season. Also belugas as well, which is probably why many of you have tuned in today. In July and August, they are spending their time in the Churchill River estuary in an incredible number. We can have up to 3,000, even as high as 3,500 whales in the height of the season that are spending time in the Churchill River. So those are the 4 Bs of Churchill and why people come up to Churchill. And we will explore a little bit more about the area itself. So on your screen, you should see a very colorful view, but if you find that little purple star that showed up on the western side of Hudson's Bay, that's where Churchill is. And what all these colors are representing are different habitat types. So we have the lovely sort of aquamarine, or turquoise, if you will, to the north. That is the tundra ecosystem. We also have the blue, which is the saltwater or marine ecosystem of the Hudson's Bay. And then we have that darker green color, which is the boreal forest or the taiga ecosystem. And you can see they're all converging on the area of Churchill. So we don't have just one habitat type to explore. We actually have all 3 converging on that area. So for anybody adventuring up to Churchill, what that means is that based on the intersection, or that ecotone or ecosystem transition zone that we have with those 3 habitat types converging, we should have more opportunity to see wildlife and different species. So for example, not that they're easy to see, but we're always searching for Arctic fox sightings, and we are searching for red fox sightings as well. So that could be one of the animals that you could see. The Arctic fox is an animal of the tundra, and the red fox is an animal more of the boreal forest. But again, because of that transition zone, we could have the opportunities of seeing either or both in the same area. So we've always thought about Churchill as a crossroads. It's also a crossroads for human life as well, our Aboriginal people, many different groups converging on the area of Churchill based on these different habitat types converging in the same area. So a very culturally rich area and a cultural crossroad for humans as well. And when we're up in Churchill on adventure, there are lots of influences in the community. We have different First Nations or Aboriginal backgrounds from the Dene, the Cree, and the Métis First Nations. We also will see a slight influence from the Inuit, which are the Aboriginal people to the north, typically more up in the Nunavut territory, but the northern border of Manitoba does border on Nunavut territory. And Inukshuks, which is the name of this sculpture or structure that you see on your screen right now. This is a symbol of Inuit culture, and the word Inukshuk actually means acting in the manner of a human. And you'll find a lot more out about what this symbol means and a little bit more about some of the different structures and meanings behind them when you're up in Churchill. But this is one Inukshuk that is not a traditional Inukshuk. It's more for a photo op and also to symbolize the culture that lies to the north. But this is on the Hudson's Bay, just by the beach. So you'll definitely be photographing and checking out this beautiful structure when you go up to Churchill in the summertime. And of course, aside from our First Nations and Aboriginal history in the area, there's also some incredible history from the Age of Exploration. So many expeditions were in search of the Northwest Passage starting in around the 1600s, but the Northwest Passage was not found at that time, but what was found was a wealth in furs. So then we had the fur trade start up. So there's lots and lots of human history with these expeditions, and then with the Hudson's Bay Company formation up in the area as well. So that's definitely another side to the history that will be explored on our adventure up in Churchill in the summertime. Hopefully you'll see on your screen a beautiful aerial view of the bustling metropolis of Churchill. I always talk about the Churchill skyscraper. So if you're looking sort of the left-hand side of the photo there, you can follow that main road, which is Kelsey Boulevard, all the way to the highest building in town. That is the port of Churchill, and that's where the train line ends. But you can see it's a little hard to get lost in Churchill, but lots and lots of beautiful viewing options. You can see that on the left-hand side, the Churchill River is wrapping around behind that Churchill skyscraper or the port and emptying into the Hudson's Bay. So in a beautiful location for the adventure. Also remembering that we have a town of maybe 750 to 850 people, lots of wonderful people to meet. And the lovely thing about going up in the summertime is it's definitely not as busy as it is in polar bear season, because not as many people know about this hidden gem in the summertime with birds and belugas and wildflowers bursting into bloom. So typically the locals have a lot more time to be able to share with us and share some stories and tell us a little bit more about what living in Churchill is like year-round, because again, this is an Arctic outpost town, so great opportunity to spend more relaxed time up in Churchill. And those of you that have been up there for polar bear season, when every single bed in all the hotels are full and every seat in the restaurants are full, you'll definitely know what I'm talking about. But it's a relaxed, lovely time in the summertime in this outpost town. And here we're looking at the Hudson's Bay on a map, and you can see all these lovely wiggly blue lines approaching the bay. Those are all the rivers that are pouring into the Hudson's Bay itself. So the Hudson's Bay is salt water, and we would call it an inland sea. And in terms of area, it's about 400,000 square miles is what this inland sea encompasses. So it's about 850 miles long by about 650 miles wide. And more than 1/3 of Canada's fresh water actually drains into the Hudson's Bay. And if you're interested in volume rates, which of course, being a naturalist, I definitely am. I hope some of you are as well, but there's more than 30,000 cubic meters per second of fresh water flowing into the Hudson's Bay. So absolutely astronomical, really, really dynamic. And that also really influences a lot about sea ice formation and other aspects that we can explore while we're up on our adventure. But if you're still struggling to figure out the size of Hudson's Bay, if you are familiar with the state of Texas, Texas is about 270 square miles in area. So you could plunk the state of Texas into the Hudson's Bay, and you'd still have a very large moat around the outside. So hopefully that gives a little bit more perspective into this huge body of salt water that we're on the shores of. And that whole area there that you can see, Hudson's Bay does have a seasonal sea ice covering over the top of it. It's a really, really dynamic, really changeable area. And there's your town of Churchill on the western shoreline of Hudson's Bay. And these lovely magical whales. If you have never seen a beluga whale, it is one of the most incredible creatures in the world. Absolutely. I've been lucky enough to travel many places and enjoy lots of wildlife viewing, but belugas have definitely stolen my heart. So these white whales, belugas, the name beluga translates to the white one in Russian. And Latin name, Delphinapterus lucus, means white dolphin without a wing in English. And what that wing, or lack thereof, is referring to is, you'll notice if you look along the back of the beluga in the photos here, they don't have a dorsal fin. And that is one of the main characteristics of an ice-adapted whale. So these whales are living under sea ice and having to come up to breathe, of course being mammals. So having a big dorsal fin in the way would just be an obstruction when they're moving in and around sea ice. So ice-adapted whales, no dorsal fin. You'll also notice they have really small but very broad paddle-shaped pectoral flippers, and they do have a small but very distinct beak there. You can see that beluga that's almost smiling into the GoPro. Definitely has a beak. Really, really interesting fact as well is that these whales can move their necks around. They have the ability to articulate their neck and actually move around. They have their 7 neck vertebrae that are not fused, whereas almost all other whales in the world have fused neck vertebrae. So these guys can actually stop and look at you, whereas if a killer whale, an orca, was to look around, they actually have to move their entire body because almost all the other whales have a fused neck vertebrae. So really, really interesting. That's also another ice adaptation that the belugas have. And typically, for distribution, these whales are only distributed in Arctic and subarctic waters and nowhere else in the world. So they're typically living in these Arctic and subarctic waters along the coast of Canada, Alaska, Russia, Norway, and Greenland. And here you can see a map of Hudson's Bay again, but there's lots of little shading areas that you'll see. So from the global population of belugas, Canada has about 35% of the world's total population. And the Western Hudson's Bay population, we have just over 57,000 individuals that will distribute themselves and spread out along the western side of the Hudson's Bay throughout the summertime. And how the populations are determined is by their geographical distribution in the summertime. So these belugas are typically spending their winter outside of the Hudson's Bay because the Hudson's Bay has that ice covering, but off to the top and to the right side of the Hudson's Bay itself, or to the east side, there's Hudson Strait, and that's where we believe these whales will overwinter. We don't know a lot about their wintertime behavior because it's very difficult to have research teams out in very harsh conditions up in the Arctic and subarctic areas. But we believe they spend their wintertime in Hudson Strait, and then they come down the western side of Hudson's Bay, and they will spend their summer in and around the river mouths and the estuaries of some of the main rivers in the area. So the Churchill River estuary, as a Churchill River population, maxes out around 3,500 whales, which is absolutely stunning. But certainly something we know about belugas is that they show very high site fidelity, meaning they return to the same sites year after year after year. So those whales that are spending a summer in the Churchill River estuary, they are part of that Churchill River population. And typically they do migrate, of course, and they're migrating typically along that western coastline of Hudson's Bay and swimming between Southampton Island and Coates Island towards Hudson Strait for the wintertime, again up towards the top eastern side of the Hudson's Bay and out into areas where there is no seasonal ice cover so that they can breathe easily and forage and move around. And This is a photo I took maybe 2 summers ago from a zodiac, which is something that you will enjoy when you go up to Churchill in the summer on this adventure. And you can see this whale is blowing, it's hailing. And from this photo, you can see there's a single blowhole, which is a characteristic of a toothed whale, to which the belugas belong to. And in the Western Hudson's Bay population, research has shown that there are over 100 different prey species of fish, crustaceans, and squid that these whales will prey upon. Another up-close and personal photograph taken by Alex DeVries up in Churchill on a GoPro. But this is a younger whale. And how do I know that? When we look at the coloration of beluga whales, it will tell us a general or rough estimate of their age. Typically when baby belugas are born, for the first day, maybe up to a day and a half to 2 days, they have a really odd, interesting orangish tinge to them. But after that, they will darken to a darker gray. And over their lifetime, they will go pale. They will lighten, and they will be totally white between the ages of 6 to 8 years. So if you have a darker gray individual, the darker they are, typically the younger they are. So really, really interesting. They also go white with age. And you can see this is another GoPro photograph underwater. You can also see that the whale that is swimming with its back down towards the bottom of the river and its belly up has craned its head so it can look up at the zodiac that is traveling with some Natural Habitat Adventures guests right up above it. So again, you're seeing that articulation of the neck, the ability to move their neck and look around and check out their underwater world. Another incredible aspect to belugas, and something that you can enjoy in Churchill in the summertime with up to 3,000 to 3,500 whales in the river, are their vocalizations. Beluga whales are known as sea canaries because they are the most vocal whale in the world. And the summer before last, we were up in Churchill with one of our Natural Habitat Adventures groups in the Zodiac out on the Churchill River, and we had our hydrophone down and we were listening to vocalizations from the belugas. And there was a researcher nearby, and she was actually recording and studying their vocalizations, and she told us that we were only hearing 25% of the vocalizations that these whales were making, based on the fact that our ears can only hear certain frequencies of sound, and belugas are able to generate lower frequencies and much higher frequencies than what we can actually hear. And I cannot imagine any more sound than what we were hearing. It sounds like an orchestra warming up. It's an absolute cacophony of sound. Absolutely, absolutely stunning, but certainly an unforgettable highlight of going up to Churchill in the summertime. But these sea canaries you will definitely hear when you're up in Churchill. And if you have a GoPro camera and you have a pole that you can put the camera on and put it underwater, if you film when you're on the Zodiac trips, you can actually record the sound as well. So here we have a lovely group of Natural Habitat Adventures guests on their Zodiac tour. So for the total for our trip, we can have up to 14 guests, and they will be split between 2 boats. So typically 7 people maximum per Zodiac. So lots and lots of space for elbow room, for camera gear to move around. And it's basically 6 other friends plus yourself by this time, because we've traveled up to Churchill together and we know all each other's names. So there's always somebody to hold your camera lens, or you could say, "Oh, you're a duck," and we'll have lots of room to get our great shots. But typically up on our Churchill adventures, we'll go on 2 different 2-hour excursions by Zodiac to go out and look at the belugas. Of course, these are weather dependent. Sometimes we have high winds and things like that we're working around, but the local operator that we work with for our Zodiac tours is very flexible and is amazing in terms of helping us out if weather is giving us a hard time. But when we go out in the Zodiacs, this really allows us an intimate, up close and personal view of the belugas. And again, you do have both photography and GoPro opportunities to catch the vocalizations and views of the whales underwater. And of course, very important to look good while you're on your adventure. So we call this the Churchill summer sex appeal. Really important to plan on dressing warmly and in a waterproof fashion. Even though these photos can give it a little bit of a warmer look, everybody's wearing lots of layers. And certainly when I pack to go up to Churchill in the summertime, definitely bringing wool long johns, warm underlayers, and the most waterproof jacket and pants that I have. And really good idea to bring waterproof hiking boots as well, because it definitely can rain up in the subarctic in the summertime. Also, if we have any breeze, which is quite typical off the Hudson's Bay, we can have blowing spray when we're out in the Zodiac. So definitely a good idea to waterproof yourself. And if you have a dry bag for your camera gear or your extra belongings, that works out really well. Here you can see another view of viewing beluga whales from a Zodiac. Lots of photo opportunities. We can sometimes have a little bit more roll to the waves. We can be in the river mouth where it's a bit more protected, or we can be out just on the edge of the Hudson's Bay where there's more tide and more wave influence. So again, wanting to dress warmly and be waterproof, but definitely we can have quite a bit of movement depending on where we are and what we're looking at, whether the whales are feeding up in the river or out in the mouth of the bay. We want to be dressed comfortably for those opportunities. Definitely something not to count on, but to be hopeful for. There is a possibility of spotting polar bears when we're out on the boats in the Zodiac, when we're looking at belugas. We're always keeping our eyes peeled in the distance on the shoreline, just in case there's any creamy colored lumps that are living, breathing polar bears. So really good idea to bring your binoculars if you have them from home. And also if you have a long camera lens, keep it in your bag. That's how I got these photographs. I took both of these images with a 400mm lens. So if you are hoping for a possibility of a polar bear sighting or photograph, definitely thinking longer distance. But we're always hopeful. We never count on it, but it just depends on what's been going on with the ice breakup and what time of year, what's been going on, and whether wildlife is in the area. But certainly the glimpse of a polar bear in the summertime is a possibility. So we always keep our eyes open and we work as a team. Other opportunities, when we are in Churchill, one of our other trips will take us out on a vessel called the Sea North 2, and that's a 32-passenger vessel, and it's a jet boat, so no moving parts under the water, so very, very, very safe to cruise around in the river around whales. The whales cannot possibly be injured by this vessel, but this will take us from the town of Churchill side of the river, across the river, to the Prince of Wales Fort. And we also will be able to do some beluga whale viewing from either the bow area or the stern area. There's raised decks, a lovely boat. You get a little bit more of a vantage point from above, so a different photographic opportunity from the deck of the Sea North 2. But the Sea North 2 will take us across the river to visit that Parks Canada site, the Prince of Wales Fort. This is a National Historic Site and a wonderful opportunity to learn more about the Hudson's Bay Company history in the area. And this is a spot where we do get to go for a bit of a walk. It's about 1.5 miles along boardwalk, so easy walking. We are escorted by Parks Canada staff, and they will be enlightening us in regards to some of the incredible history of the Hudson's Bay Company and also the First Nations and the history of the fur trade. You also see we are traveling through some absolutely beautiful wildflowers as well. Here is the Prince of Wales Fort on a bit of a nicer day. When you look at this fort, absolutely incredible structure. The walls are about 40 feet thick and 16 feet high, and it took 30 years to build. Pardon me, 40 years to build. It was built in 1731, and it finished in 1771. So it took 40 years to build. And while we're traveling with the Parks Canada staff, here we can learn about the lifestyle of the Hudson's Bay Company employees that lived here year-round on the edge of the Hudson's Bay up in the subarctic as they struggled to survive in such a harsh environment. Really interesting stories. One of my favorite memories is just envisioning life where frost could be up to a foot thick on the inside of your bedroom wall. You had to be very careful going to bed in here while people were living at the fort, that your hair did not touch the wall itself, because there are many accounts of men's hair actually freezing to the wall. So really, really incredible view into the history of human life in this area. Another opportunity that we will be able to go on while we are up in Churchill in the summertime is to head out onto the tundra in a polar rover for an afternoon and evening excursion in comfort to go out and look at the tundra. Now, don't be worried, definitely a beautiful vehicle, both outside and inside. There's a flush toilet in a small bathroom, very similar to an airline bathroom, so that's all taken care of. There's a back deck for viewing opportunities as well, and while we rove along at a slow pace along the tundra, we will be keeping our eyes peeled for any wildlife viewing opportunities. Have had some stunning views of tundra swans and their young, incredible wildflowers, occasional sighting of Arctic fox, and other Arctic wildlife as well. So great opportunity, and you can see very spacious, very comfortable inside. There's about 32 seats in here, and for a group of 14 or 15 of us, everybody has lots of elbow room, lots of storage space for camera gear and belongings. Everybody has 2 seats and a window spot. So definitely a beautiful opportunity to enjoy up in Churchill, and we will have a meal out there as well. So great opportunity and a totally different aspect and different side to Churchill itself. For those of you that are interested in bird life, this is a world-renowned hotspot for birding with over 200 species of birds that are nesting or passing through on their annual migration. We can maybe see tundra swans, we have incredible loon species. Also, the Arctic tern is one of my favorite. This is a bird that weighs less than an iPhone, but sees 2 summers a year. It's the bird of eternal summer. It spends the northern hemisphere summer up in the Arctic and then flies down to the Antarctic for the southern hemisphere summer. At an annual migration of over 50,000 miles, the longest migration to date that we know of a bird that had a tracker on it was just over 59,000 miles. And that's one of the longest migrations in the animal kingdom. This bird nests in Churchill, and there are several hot spots to go and see with the spotting scope that we have, see the young. You can watch the young terns, and you can see the parents dive bomb any humans or anything else that gets too close. So definitely the Arctic tern is a highlight while you're up in Churchill. Other opportunities while we're in Churchill, we will get out and about and enjoy the convergence zone where we have the marine habitat, the boreal forest, and the tundra, all converging on this one spot, and we can go on many different short walks to explore that biodiversity in the area, whether we're down at the beach or whether we're nearer to the boreal forest or out on the tundra itself. Beautiful, beautiful opportunity to enjoy a very rich landscape, rich in both species numbers and also in colors as well. So hopefully you'll see on your screen a beautiful Churchill summer sunset along the shores of Hudson's Bay. Another side to the colors as well, we have all sorts of different wildflowers. This one is called the Rops paintbrush, and those flowers are no taller than knee-high. So very, very short, intense growing season up here in the summertime. So we see incredible plant species like this 3-tooth saxifrage. We also have some of my other favorite ones, like the northern grass of Parnassus. There's white mountain avens. If you're into orchids, we have beautiful bog orchids that are smaller than your thumbnail. Some of them no smaller or no larger than your smallest fingernail. We can also see a little bit larger one called the northern lady slipper as well. So lots of opportunities to be down on the ground, down on our knees, and doing a little bit more macro or micro photography. Also, we will have a family. Those that have been traveling from Winnipeg up to Churchill and back down to Winnipeg again, you will have 14 new best friends. So great opportunity to spend a lot of time with other people adventuring and learning together. A couple of amazing things that are also additions to the trip. Snorkeling is a possibility in the Churchill River at the very edge of the bay. That can be added onto your trip if you talk to your adventure specialist. I definitely recommend doing this. It's a bit of a chilly encounter, but it is possible to see belugas through your snorkel mask underwater in the Churchill River at the edge of the bay. And you can see that these lines are out behind the boat, very gently towing snorkelers along. You can't move around very much, so the best thing is to do is float face down at the surface, but absolutely stunning opportunity that you could add on to your trip as a trip extra. And one other opportunity that's included in the trip now is kayaking out on the Churchill River. And you can have up close and personal encounters with beluga whales. Sometimes they'll even bump the bottom of your boat, not to tip you over, but just in a curious way. You'll feel little bumps, or you might see some splashes, but definitely kayaking out on the Churchill River is absolutely stunning way to see the belugas as well. Of course, with snorkeling and kayaking and zodiacking, anytime we're out on the water, all of these opportunities are subject to weather and availability, but certainly if you are interested in finding out more about these, or if you would like to add snorkeling to your trip, definitely talk to your adventure specialist about that to find out some more information. But very different viewing opportunities from all of these different angles. So certainly something to take advantage of when you're up in Churchill. Just like to say a quick thank you to a wonderful photographer, Alex DeVries Magnifico. He had donated those photos of the underwater beluga GoPro footage and all of those smiling whales. That was all photographs from Alex. A couple of photos came from the Hotel Fort Garry, from Sea North Tours, our local operator in Churchill, for the Zodiac pictures and the photo of Sea North Tours. Great White Bear for their photo of the Polar Rover and the town of Churchill aerial photo. All the other pictures in here were photos that I took up on adventure in Churchill in the summertime with Natural Habitat Adventures. So hopefully you enjoyed the photographs and learned a little bit about Churchill in the summertime. Just wanted to say thank you very much from my end and hope you've enjoyed thus far.
Well, gosh, thank you. That was just such an incredible webinar. We've all learned a lot, and I've got some good questions here for you. You probably could guess what the #1 question is, but we had this one come in several times. We have a lot of other audience members wondering about the insect population in the summertime and whether we need to worry about mosquitoes and other flying insects.
Well, that's a very good question. It sounds like we have some very knowledgeable people listening in today. So certainly I am a person that if there are insects around that will bite you, they might take a nibble. And we can definitely see mosquitoes and black flies up in Churchill in the summertime. One of the saving graces up in Churchill is that we typically have a steady breeze, which keeps the insect numbers low. We do give out head nets. We have those for you when you arrive on trip. So if you bring a good hat with you, a baseball hat, or if you have a hat that has a brim all the way around, you can just plunk that head net on top of that, and you will enjoy all breathing and conversing insect-free. But typically it's only in areas when we're down low, if it's really, really still, that we would notice them. But we will have insect repellent with us up there to deal with any pesky flies in the area. But something that I do every time I go up to Churchill in the summertime, I always have a rain jacket with me, so that if it's a warmer day and there's a couple of insects around, I just put my raincoat on, and I try not to wear yoga pants because they can bite through those, so just wear any sort of quick dry hiking pant, and that seems to be a great pairing to keep any insects at bay. But normally, again, when we're out on the river, when we're looking for beluga whales, there's a breeze blowing and that keeps the insects away.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know. We have questions about the nesting season, and we're wondering when the nesting season is and whether it overlaps substantially with the whales.
So, very good question. So I'm just assuming in terms of birds in general, but not any specific species. Certainly for the bird season, it does coincide with beluga season. So July and August, both months are great for bird life and for whales. And just depends on weather and what's been going on in terms of environmental conditions. But typically, if you're coming or planning on a trip and planning on coming up earlier in July, that would be when we may see birds still sitting on the last eggs or the very young chicks, and they will age throughout July into August. But typically we were able to see chicks of various bird species through the early part of August, and definitely whales were amazing July and August for sure. So if you're looking for birds or flowers or belugas, this is the 2 months when you have the opportunity to see all three.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. So what happens if the weather is bad when you're up there? Is there some flexibility in the schedule, or do you just forge on through?
Very good question. It depends on what the weather's looking like. Certainly there's lots of options, and the bonus about being in Churchill in the summertime when there's not a lot of other adventurers around is that we have flexibility within the community. So we have wonderful relationships with the company that is our local operator for the Zodiac trips and the boat excursions. Of course, they can't change the weather, but they are always willing to work with our expedition leaders and with the confines of what's going on in the time frame in town with that week to work around if wind and large waves is going to cancel one of our trips. You know, there's always been flexibility and ease of movement that your expedition leader will work with the locals in town, and they're always happy to work with us. But we certainly have options for bad weather. Of course, we like to have plans A through Z, or Z, depending on where you're from in the world. But when we go up to Churchill, we do have indoor opportunities so that we're using our time, we're learning from the locals, we're connecting with people in the community, whether it's First Nations elders there or other programs like meeting some of the local sled dogs and things like that. There's lots and lots of opportunities, whether the weather is favorable or whether the weather is giving us a little bit of a storm off the Hudson's Bay. Lots of flexibility and lots of things to do.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. So thinking about camera gear and so forth, we had a question that says, do you find that people share their GoPro photos with each other, or do you really need to buy one for yourself?
That is a very good question, but that would depend on the other folks on your trip. I certainly have had a lot of footage that guests have been willing to share at the end of trips with Natural Habitat. Everybody seems to be fairly like-minded and adventurous in spirit and warm in heart as well. So that's one of the bonuses of traveling on a small group trip. But you can't count on other people having GoPros. When I run my trips, I have one, and sometimes there's a use of one from Natural Habitat as well. But that would be something maybe to chat a little bit more with your adventure specialist about and just find out any details specifically. But I have found that people are willing to share their photos, and our expedition leaders will be able to share any photos that they take on the trip as well. So certainly it's not something that you would have to go out and buy, but just understanding that people would have the option of saying yes or no to sharing their own photographs, but certainly our expedition leader will be more than happy to share them.
Okay, that's great. What about luggage? How much luggage can we bring, or should we bring?
That is an excellent question, and that will depend on what trip you're doing. So in the information that Natural Habitat gives out as part of the trip, even down to the pound will be listed in that information. So depending on if you're flying on the or taking the train and then taking that little charter flight, I would definitely ask your adventure specialist about that one, just in case there's been any changes pre-season that I don't know about yet or haven't heard about. But all of that will be easily accessed through your adventure specialist or through the pre-trip information as well, down to the pound.
Okay. Well, just a couple more questions and then we will stop. What about the water? Is the water rough? Would someone be seasick?
So really good question. The thing with seasickness, I've spent my whole life on the ocean and just got back from Antarctica and crossing the Drake Passage. So everybody is different in terms of motion. Some people cannot take 10 minutes on a boat or a train without feeling unwell, whereas folks that are, touch wood, lucky like myself, some of us don't have problems with motion on the water. So certainly if you're somebody that does tend to get motion sick on boats, because the weather is very changeable, keeping in mind we're up in the subarctic area on the edge of the Hudson's Bay, also depending on tide. Some days we do have tide and wind that based on the timing of our tour, when we go out, it can be calm and then it can whip up a little bit. Or, you know, hey, if we were lucky enough to get a sighting of another wildlife species, possibly a polar bear or something like that, we can sometimes go into areas with slightly larger waves. Of course, nothing that would ever be unsafe. And we certainly try to keep everybody comfortable, and our Zodiac drivers are top notch. But it is possible that some people could feel a little unwell. So I know many guests that I've had before have worn sea bands that sit on those pressure points. Will we can bring ginger with us. But if you know that you have motion sickness as part of your repertoire in life, definitely you want to bring whatever medications that you would normally take when you went on a boat. If we're up in the river, it's typically calm, but again, we want to be able to take advantage of any wildlife opportunities that we could have for viewing, so that everybody gets the most bang from their adventure that they possibly can. So we can definitely have some wave action when we're out in the zodiacs.
Okay, well that's good to know. And then on the snorkeling, is the gear provided, all the gear in like maybe dry suits or wetsuits or whatever, is all that provided?
Really good question. Yes, everything is provided by the local operator for the snorkeling. The wetsuits is what they are. So those will be 7 millimeters thick on the legs and the arms, but on the main body part around your core will be 14 millimeters thick. So pretty hard to move around, but that makes things easy, because then you're basically just floating, flopped out on the surface, and that will keep you buoyant and will also keep you warm, but you will be wet. Of course, with wetsuits, water does enter into the suit, and it's your body heat that warms up that thin layer of water that's trapped against your skin. But they will provide booties, they'll provide hoods, they've got the snorkels and masks as well. So all of that is provided up in Churchill. So you don't have to fill your suitcase with all of that gear.
Very good, very good. Okay, the train. I think you mentioned the train. Is the train still running?
So good question. The train is running, but it's not running all the way up to Churchill. So for those folks that were wanting to take the train, you would take the train from Winnipeg up to Thompson, so just over 600 to 700 miles. You typically get on at noon in Winnipeg, and you'd spend the night on the train, and you get off the next day somewhere around noon in Thompson, where you would spend the night for the train itineraries. But the train itself is not reaching up to Churchill at the moment. They've had some flooding and some washouts, and now there's a bit of a discussion going on between the Canadian government about the train line and who's on the line to fix it. So the train line has not been running up to Churchill. So we're just going up to Thompson on the train. But it's a beautiful opportunity to travel through the prairies, and then you'll be traveling up into the boreal forest area of Thompson itself.
Okay. All right. So last question for you. With changing weather patterns, have you seen a shift in the beluga habits? Do you find that they're maybe later, or peak time has shifted at all?
Very good question. So certainly that's a question that researchers are also trying to answer as well. But one thing that I really love about traveling and working with Natural Habitat Adventures is that with Natural Habitat, we only pick the core season of sort of best opportunities for viewing. So certainly the belugas may start showing up around the end of, or mid-June to end of June. So there has been some fluctuation with when they're starting to show up in great numbers. And certainly we have seen that when we've started our polar bear season in the last couple of years, which is typically around the 10th of October or so, we have seen some beluga whales some of the years that have hung around a lot longer. Typically they're leaving the Churchill River in September. But some of the years where we've had later ice formation, the whales have been hanging around. So however they're able to tell that through water conditions or slowed cooling of the surface waters, we're not sure, but certainly there has been fluctuation in their environment to do with sea ice, and that will directly relate to the behavior long-term of what the belugas will do. But we are certainly seeing that July and August are the main times for viewing opportunities up in this area still, but maybe 25 years from now, that could be different.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, I will stop there, and thank you so much for everything that you were able to share with us today. So let me turn it back to you for closing comments.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for spending your time, and hopefully you have learned a little bit more about Churchill in the summertime and that your interest is piqued. But I definitely know that any of you that plan on going up to Churchill in the summertime will easily see why this is one of my favorite places in the world to travel. But hopefully everyone has a lovely rest of their day and good adventuring.
Yes, and my thanks as well. And with that, we will conclude our webinar. Goodbye, everyone.